Hey guys, welcome back to ORMS TV. Today I have the all-new Fuji X-S10 for you guys. And this is actually a very interesting release from Fuji. Not so much in terms of its specifications or anything like that, but very much in terms of the design, the layout, and the handling of this camera. Now, I've been shooting with it for the last couple of days, and I'm going to show you guys exactly why I think this is such an interesting camera. It works, so why change anything? Now, for those of you who are new to Fuji's cameras, I'm going to give you a quick spec rundown. So this unit has a 26 megapixel X-Trans CMOS sensor, and that'll be very, very familiar because it is the exact same sensor that you find in the Fuji X-T30. You've got 4K video at 30 frames per second, both DCI and UHD 4K. DCI is actually very nice to have in a camera at this price point and not something that we see all that often. Now, the unit also has built-in image stabilization, so sensor shift image stabilization, which you can augment with an electronic image stabilization as well, which again crops into the frame ever so slightly. Your ISO range runs all the way from 80 to a maximum of 51,200. Additional to that, and really emphasizing this camera's focus on a more video shooting market, is the fact that you have both a mic input and a socket for headphones for monitoring that audio. And that's pretty much it, really. Now, in terms of both image and video quality, the camera is perfectly good and perfectly average within Fuji's lineup. And that's not a bad thing. It might sound like a bad thing, but it's really not. If you compare this unit to other cameras that I've personally shot with, like the X-T4, the X-T30, the previous generation X-T3, the Fuji X-H1, this unit delivers that level of quality. And that is what Fuji brings to the market. It doesn't really matter where in the lineup you buy, you are going to get that Fuji quality. You get a tried and tested sensor here that delivers phenomenal results. You have the film simulation modes that we all know and love. You can shoot your video with that film simulation modes active. The video is pretty much identical to that you're going to get out of your X-T4, except that you have more limitations in terms of your frame rates. It's very reminiscent of what you're going to get out of the X-T30, but you have image stabilization. It fills that middle gap just about perfectly. And it's exactly what you expect from a Fuji within this range. Excellent image quality, perfectly good video quality, really nothing to disappoint here. Now, with the X-S10, you also have a total of 425 autofocus points. And the autofocus in stills is incredible. It's snappy, it's quick, it's right there. It's exactly what you expect from Fuji. Again, because it's the exact same autofocus system that is in many of their other models, which is great for stills, not so much for video. Because unfortunately, even though the unit has both face and eye detect autofocus and continuous lock-on tracking autofocus in video, it doesn't work all that well. We've seen it in all of the other models. It's okay, but it's definitely not industry leading, and we weren't expecting any major shakeups in that bracket. Now, the other change that Fuji has introduced here comes in the image stabilization system. Now, you'll know that the X-T30, on which a lot of the internals of this camera is based, doesn't have any IBIS. The other side of the coin here is that a lot of the layout and design is based on Fuji's X-H1 camera. Now, that unit did have image stabilization, but it was very much a first generation style system. And I'm happy to say that the IBIS in here is much better than what you got in the X-H1. It's not quite as good as the IBIS from the X-T4, but this is also a much smaller camera. And because of that, they had to shrink down the IBIS module ever so slightly, and they had to redesign it completely. Now, what you get here is that with compatible lenses, so lenses that are also image stabilized, you will get up to 6 stops of image stabilization. Now, on the X-T4, you'll get about 6.5 stops. In all of the shooting that I did, I barely noticed that half a stop. Now, where that system really shines is, of course, when you're shooting video. It's actually very easy to shoot handheld video with this. You have the little flip out LCD screen, which is very nice. In terms of the video, you also have Fuji's very good and very flat F-log profile, which is excellent if you want to grade your work afterwards. It's a really solid little setup for video shooting. Dialies, bam, bam, bam. There's a grip, holy I can hold this Fuji, unlike any other Fuji. Let's talk about the rest of this body design, because that really is where the X-S10 sets itself apart from everything else in Fuji's lineup. Now, when I first saw this camera, I actually thought that it's going to be roughly the same size as the X-H1, but it's actually tiny. Like, this thing is really, really small. The body itself is a lot more closely sized to something like the X-T30 or even Fuji's X-T200. And they actually pulled off a really nice trick here, and it sits right here. Look at that grip. For the first time in a very long time, I can actually get my hand around a Fuji grip. And I have relatively big hands. I can even get a pinky on there and still use the camera. If you take anything else, the X-T30, the X-T4, the grips are really small, and Fuji almost forces you to get the added grip extensions to actually be able to hold the camera properly if you have bigger hands. Now, the other thing to notice here is that when you look at the top, this is actually a little bit more in line with modern DSLRs and some other mirrorless cameras from other manufacturers. You have dials over here that you can use and you can assign to any function that you'd like. And over here you have a very traditional mode dial. And this is something that Fuji skews away on pretty much all of their other cameras. They go for a very traditional, very analog approach to their units, where you have physical dials for the shutter speed, physical dials for the ISO that's set out, labeled at the top, and can actually be quite intimidating for new users. And this unit completely shies away from that. It actually has quite a minimalist approach. Now, I know a lot of people isn't going to like it, and if I'm honest, coming from owning an X-T3, an X-T2, an X-T10, and shooting a lot with the X-T4, I didn't like this at all initially. I thought, you know, Fuji, what are you doing? You're going away from your roots here. But once you get used to it, and once you actually understand where Fuji's aiming this camera, it really makes a lot of sense. On the side here, you have your microphone jack, you have your USB-C ports and your HDMI, and Fuji actually includes a little adapter for the USB-C port so that it can be used for audio monitoring, basically going USB-C to a 3.5mm input jack. Battery goes at the bottom here, as well as your single SD card slot. Would I have liked to see a dual SD card? Yes, but that would have also made the body a little bit bigger. Overall, after I got used to it, I actually really enjoyed the layout of this little unit. Bam! Nobody holds a camera like that. Super casual. Now, at the beginning of this video, I told you that I'm going to tell you why I think this is a good camera. The X-S10 is a good camera because of how easy it is to customize it. If you're somebody who comes from a relatively entry-level DSLR, a Canon, a Nikon, anything like that, you would have been locked into a very specific dial and button layout and a very specific control scheme. If you come into a camera like this, at first it can be a little bit daunting because you have a completely different layout, a different menu setup, a different control scheme to what you're used to. But not with this X-S10. This X-S10 can be set up to function exactly as your existing camera that you're upgrading from does. It's a camera that molds to you, a camera that molds to your shooting style. I take myself, when I started using this camera, I prefer Fuji's more analog layout cameras, the X-T30, the X-T4. But once I dialed everything into how I like it, it all kind of makes sense. It just sort of clicked. And it kind of actually reminded me of shooting on much more simple cameras. You know, cameras like your entry-level Canon or Nikon DSLRs, the type of camera that you start with. And if you tie this into where Fuji aims this camera, it really, really makes sense. Fuji aims this camera at the type of person who comes from a relatively entry-level DSLR and wants to take that step into Fuji's lineup. And Fuji realizes that something like the X-T30 or even the X-T4 is quite a formidable beast to approach. because of all the dials and all the settings that you have there. But not this, not the XS10. The XS10 is an easy, simple camera. It can be adjusted to be exactly the type of camera that you want it to be. This is not the best camera that you're ever going to have. It really, really isn't. There's better cameras out there. There's better cameras in Fuji's own lineup, but this really fills a gap. A very, very sweet spot. It makes Fuji the type of brand that you can upgrade into. And that is exactly what this camera is. You upgrade into it and then you grow within Fuji's ecosystem. And for that, this little camera sits perfectly. Tell us if there's, nah, it sounds weird. Sounds weird, sounds weird. Sounds weird, sounds weird. Well guys, thank you very much for joining us for that very quick review of the Fuji X-S10. Are you currently an entry-level DSLR user and considering upgrading to the X-S10? Tell us why in the comments down below. We'd love to know what piques your interest. If you've enjoyed any of the content that we put out, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps us out a lot. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.